My parents signed our family house over to my sister behind my back, so I brought one document to the lawyer. The pen was still warm from my father's hand when the lawyer slid the document across the table and said, "Congratulations to your sister, the new sole owner of the family house." My chair scraped back so hard the floor shrieked. My mother wouldn't look at me. My sister Diane smiled the way people smile when they've been waiting a long time for something. Like she had rehearsed this moment in private and was finally getting to perform it. My hands started shaking before I could stop them. "You signed it over?" I asked. Silence. The ceiling fan turned slowly overhead, indifferent to everything beneath it. My father's voice when it came was terrifyingly calm. "You moved out, Elena. Diane stayed. It's only fair." That sentence landed like a slap I hadn't seen coming. My name is Elena Voss. I am 31 years old. I have a steady job, a small apartment across town, and for the past 6 years I have been paying the mortgage on the house that was just handed to my sister. Every single month. Never late. Never missed. In that lawyer's office, surrounded by people who were supposed to love me most, I realized they hadn't just betrayed me. They had been planning this for months. And as my sister whispered across the table, "You should have never trusted us," I understood that she was right. I didn't cry. I could feel the pressure building somewhere behind my eyes, but I would not give them that. I stood up slowly, smoothed the front of my jacket, and picked up my bag to keep my hands from shaking visibly. My mother finally looked up. Her expression wasn't guilt or regret. It was relief. The look of a woman who had been holding her breath for months and had just been allowed to exhale. That was the part that cut deepest. Diane was already texting someone, kept her fingers moving fast across the screen, probably announcing her victory to whoever had been waiting. I looked at my father one last time. He was studying the table. "Okay," I said. Just that one word. I walked down the hallway. My heels echoed against the marble floor like a countdown. No one followed. I was halfway to the door when I heard quick footsteps behind me. Then a voice, low and urgent, "Miss Voss." It was the lawyer. He wasn't calling to apologize. His face was composed, but his eyes held something careful and deliberate, the look of a man who had noticed something he hadn't been hired to notice. "You might want to look at page 4, he said. I stopped walking. The lobby was all glass and polished stone. Outside, the afternoon sun made everything sharp and overexposed. Inside, it felt like the air had been taken out of the room. The lawyer, Mr. Harmon, held the document out with both hands. I took it and turned to page 4. Clause 8. The language was dense, but the core of it was plain enough. Mortgage responsibility remains with the prior payer until the lending institution has been formally notified of ownership transfer and has issued written consent. I read it twice, then a third time. My name was still in that clause, Elena Voss, still legally tied to the mortgage on that house, regardless of what had just been signed and celebrated down the hall. They had handed Diane the asset, but the debt was still mine. I looked up from the paper. Mr. Harmon watched me with the patience of someone who understood that the person holding the document needed a moment to absorb what it meant. Then, quietly, he asked the question that changed everything. "Miss Voss, did you authorize this transfer?" The question settled over me like cold water. I looked at Mr. Harmon carefully. He was in his early 50s, reading glasses low on his nose, a stillness about him that felt deliberate. He had been hired by my parents. He owed them his fee. And yet here he was in the lobby asking me this. That told me something important. "No," I said. One syllable. Flat. Certain. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, but quiet confirmation. The look of a man whose suspicion had just been verified. He glanced down the hallway toward the conference room, then lowered his voice. "I want to be careful about what I say here, because I was retained by your parents. But Clause 8 is not a technicality. It is a binding legal condition." He let that sit for a moment. If the transfer was executed without the mortgage holder's consent, meaning without the bank's written approval, then the legality of the entire filing becomes very questionable. He said the last 2 words slowly, placing them deliberately into my hands. I folded the paper and put it in my bag. "Thank you," I said. He nodded once and walked away. I stood in the lobby alone, holding a document that was beginning to feel less like a defeat and more like a door. I sat in my car for a long time before I drove anywhere. The engine was off. I stared at the steering wheel and let myself go back. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to understand how we had arrived at this moment. 6 years ago I was 25, barely a year into my job at the architectural firm, still learning how to be an adult. My father called me on a Tuesday evening. He almost never called. He texted brief updates and considered that sufficient. But that evening his voice was tired and worn down in a way I had never heard from him before. "We're going to lose the house," he said. My mother was on the extension, crying quietly in the background. A second mortgage they hadn't told me about. A bad investment 2 years earlier. Diane had just lost her job and moved back home. The bank was not being flexible. They had 60 days. So I offered, because that is what you do when your parents are drowning and you are the only one who can help. I signed for the mortgage. I became the responsible party. The lawyer at the time asked me one question. "Do you understand what you're agreeing to?" "Yes," I said. I believed that I did. I pulled out my phone and called the bank from the car. I had been paying the mortgage through automated transfer every month for 6 years. The representative who answered was efficient and polite in the way good customer service people are trained to be. I gave her my information and asked her to pull up the account. "Has there been any refinancing? Any transfer of ownership filed with the lender? Any formal change to the responsible party?" A pause. Keyboard sounds. "No, Miss Voss, no changes to the loan structure, no refinancing, no ownership transfer requests received. You remain the sole responsible party." I closed my eyes. No refinancing, no buyout, no lender notification, nothing. My parents had transferred the property title without ever contacting the bank, without ever releasing me from the debt, without obtaining the written consent that Clause 8 explicitly required. They had transferred property they did not legally have full authority to transfer. The bank representative asked if there was anything else she could help me with. "No," I said, "thank you." I hung up. Outside, the afternoon traffic moved past in both directions, unhurried and indifferent. Mr. Harmon had used the word quietly, like a match being struck in a dark room. I turned it over in my mind now, and it fit perfectly, the way the right word always does. Fraud. My mother texted me at 7 that evening. "Come celebrate your sister's big day. Dinner at the house, 7:30. The audacity of it was almost impressive in its completeness. They had stripped me of the house I had been financing for 6 years, and now I was being invited to toast the occasion. The sensible thing would have been to decline. To go home, find my own lawyer, and begin the process quietly. But I needed to sit across from them and watch how they behaved when they believed they had already won. I needed information. So I went. I drove to the house I'd been paying for since I was 25. The house where I grew up. The house where my father had hung a tire swing in the backyard. The house that was now, according to a notarized document, my sister's. I parked on the street. I sat for a moment. Then I walked to the front door and rang the bell like a guest. Diane answered it. She was glowing. "Elena, you came." She said it like she was surprised. She was not surprised. The table was set with the good dishes. Wine was open. My parents were already seated and smiling. My father raised his glass as I sat down. Diane stood at the head of the table with her wine raised high and her chin tilted upward in a way that reminded me of every school play she had ever been in. "To my house," she said. Everyone clapped. My mother pressed her hand to her chest. My father's smile was broad and settled, the smile of a man who had resolved something that had been troubling him. I clapped too. Slowly. Twice. "Congratulations," I said, and my voice came out warm and unbothered, which was exactly what I intended. My father looked at me briefly, checking for anger or tears, the sign of someone about to make the evening difficult. He found nothing and relaxed. Diane sat down and began talking about paint colors and what she planned to do with the guest room. I listened carefully and noted what wasn't being said. Then, at a natural pause in the conversation, I set my fork down and looked across the table with an open, curious expression. "It's wonderful," I said pleasantly. "I imagine the bank must have been accommodating. These ownership transfers can get complicated." I looked directly at Diane. "Did the bank send congratulations too?" The table went quiet, in a very specific way. Not the comfortable quiet of a conversation pausing between courses. The sudden, airless quiet of a room in which everyone has realized that someone said precisely the wrong thing, or the exactly right thing, depending on which side of the table you occupied. My mother's fork hovered halfway between her plate and her mouth. My father's jaw tightened. Diane blinked. "What bank?" Her voice was light, with a faint edge of caution beneath it. The sound of a person asking a question they aren't entirely sure they want answered. I reached into my bag without urgency, the way you reach for something when you know exactly where it is. I didn't pull anything out immediately. I let my fingers rest there for a moment while I looked around the table at each of them in turn. I thought about the 25-year-old version of me who had answered a phone call on a Tuesday evening because her parents needed saving. I thought about 6 years of payments that had never been late. I thought about the word Mr. Harmon had quietly used in the lobby. Then I placed the folded paper on the table between us. It was the most recent mortgage statement. I smoothed it open with 2 fingers and turned it to face the table. The bank's letterhead was clear. The balance outstanding, still substantial, still years from payoff. And there, under responsible party, Elena Voss. My name, not Diane's, not my parents', mine. Dated 2 weeks ago. Which meant it had arrived after whatever planning they had done, after whatever paperwork had been arranged. Diane stared at it like she was reading a foreign language. My mother set her fork down. My father leaned forward. His voice was low and controlled. The voice he used when he was masking alarm. "Where did you get that?" "The lender sends it to me every month," I said, "because I'm still the one paying it." I said this the same way you'd explain the sky being blue. Matter of fact, like I couldn't understand why clarification was needed. "I never stopped paying," I continued. "The bank has no record of a transfer, no change to the responsible party, no lender consent, none of the conditions Clause 8 requires." I refolded the statement along its original crease. "I only learned about Clause 8 today," I said pleasantly. "Interesting clause." Diane recovered first. That was always her gift, the ability to pivot quickly. She leaned back in her chair and arranged her face into something trying hard to look relaxed. "So you're still paying," she said. "That doesn't change anything. The deed is in my name." "Was it properly filed?" I asked. "Of course, we were in a lawyer's office, Elena. Documents were signed and notarized." I nodded slowly, as though considering this. "The deed might say your name," I said, "but the bank never consented to the transfer. Clause 8 is specific about what happens when that step is skipped. The transfer may not be valid." "That's speculative," she said, with a faint smirk. "It is," I agreed, "which is why I haven't done anything yet." She took a sip of wine. Her hand was perfectly steady. She was good under pressure. "You'll keep paying," she said. Her voice had dropped. "You've always been responsible. You wouldn't let the house fall into default. You'd never do that." She said it like a fact, like she had accounted for this exact moment and built her entire plan around the version of me that would always do the sensible thing. "You're right," I said quietly. "I wouldn't let the house fall into default." Diane's expression softened with satisfaction. My mother exhaled. My father reached for his wine. In those 2 seconds I watched my family do what they had always done. Absorb what they wanted to hear, without examining too carefully what had actually been said. I let the silence sit for one breath. "I will stop paying," I said. 3 words, delivered at the same conversational volume as everything else I'd said all evening. My mother's hand froze. I picked up my fork and ate a small bite of food, perfectly calm. "I won't let the house fall into default," I continued. "I intend to work with the bank to resolve this correctly. But I will not continue making payments on a property transferred to someone else without my knowledge, without the bank's consent, and without any agreement protecting my interests." I looked at each of them in turn. "Unless ownership is corrected." Those 4 words changed the temperature of the room immediately. A physical shift, like pressure dropping before a storm. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. The good dishes gleamed under the dining room light. The wine sat untouched. Nobody spoke. I set down my glass and looked across the table. "You might want to ask the county recorder what happens in cases like this," I said. Then I stood, placed my napkin neatly on the table, and left. My mother stood up so fast her chair nearly toppled. You can't do that. She was pointing at me across the good dishes. You would destroy this family, Elena. I'm not destroying anything, I said. I'm describing what I will do if nothing changes. This is blackmail. Blackmail would be demanding money in exchange for silence. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for the correct name on a legal document, the name of the person who has been paying for this house for 6 consecutive years. My father stood now, slower, but with more controlled fury, both hands flat on the table. You are blackmailing us, he said. No, I said evenly. I'm correcting paperwork. The word paperwork seemed to aggravate him more than anything else. His face reddened at the temples. After everything we've done for you, what have you done for me? I asked, not bitterly, genuinely curious. The question stopped him completely. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at my mother, who was staring at the table. Diane, who had been silent since I said I would stop paying, turned to my mother with something uncertain bleeding into her expression for the first time all evening. Mom, she whispered. Her voice had lost all its earlier confidence. Is what she's saying even legal? Nobody answered her. My father's hands were still flat on the table, but the fury had shifted to something more complicated. A man who was recalculating, trying to locate the exit. My mother sat back down heavily. You're bluffing, Diane said. She had recovered herself, but her voice was thinner now. You won't actually stop the payments. The house goes into default. Your credit is destroyed right alongside ours. My name is on the mortgage, I agreed, which is exactly why I have standing to call the bank, explain that a title transfer occurred without lender consent, flag the account for review, and request that all payments be suspended pending a legal determination. I paused. I looked this process up this afternoon. It's recognized procedure. Silence. The bank would freeze everything, I continued. No new equity, no refinancing, no selling. The house would be legally suspended until the matter resolved. That could take months. Diane stared at me. My parents stared at me. The dinner had gone cold. I'm not bluffing, I said. I want you to understand that clearly, so there's no confusion later. I stood, placed my napkin on the table with deliberate neatness, and looked at them one final time. You might want to ask the county recorder what happens in cases like this. Then I walked out of the house I'd been paying for since I was 25 years old. I slept surprisingly well that night. I had expected to lie awake, replaying the evening in the way anxious people do after saying something that cannot be unsaid. But instead, I fell asleep quickly and deeply. The sleep of someone who has been carrying a weight for a long time and has finally, for the first time, set it down. In the morning, my phone was crowded with missed activity. 17 missed calls from my father, 4 from my mother, 2 from Diane. Texts stacked up through the night, each one escalating slightly. From, call me, to, please think about what you're doing to this family. My father had texted at 1 in the morning. 1 in the morning, which told me something important about how well he had slept. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window looking at the street below and thought carefully about what I wanted and what I was willing to do. I did not call any of them back. At 9:17, my phone rang with a number I recognized from the previous day, the law firm's main line. Not my family calling through their lawyer, Mr. Harmon calling on his own. I set my coffee cup down on the counter. Then I picked up. Miss Voss, Mr. Harmon said. I spoke to the county recorder's office this morning as a matter of professional due diligence. I also reviewed the mortgage documents in my client's original file. His voice was measured and deliberate. A man who understood that the line between professional obligation and personal conscience was thin, and who was choosing his words on that line carefully. I'm not in a position to represent you. That would be a conflict of interest. But I can tell you, objectively, that what I found warrants your attention. Tell me, I said. The transfer was filed without any lender notification, as you've established. The deed was recorded, but it is legally contingent on conditions that were never met. More importantly, he paused. The filing contains a signature on page 7 of the supporting authorization documents that does not appear to be yours, a co-signatory line. The handwriting is inconsistent with your signature on file from the original mortgage closing. I sat down slowly at my kitchen table. The county recorder doesn't verify signatures at the time of filing, he continued. They record what's submitted. But a mismatch of this kind, if formally challenged, opens the door to a much more serious question than a procedural error. He let a careful silence pass. That's not the biggest problem, though, he said. I pressed the phone close to my ear. What is? I asked. There's a second document, Mr. Harmon said. An internal authorization form used by the title company to process the recording. It's separate from the deed itself, essentially a representation that all required parties have consented to the transfer. He spoke slowly, each sentence arriving with clean, precise weight. Your name appears on that form. The signature is dated 4 months ago. 4 months ago. 4 months ago I had been at work, paying the mortgage like clockwork. I had attended my parents' anniversary dinner and helped my mother choose a gift. I had not signed anything related to property. I had not visited a title company. I had not authorized anything. I never signed that form, I said. I suspected as much, he said. Based on the comparison. The word comparison was doing enormous work in that sentence. He had compared signatures. He had found a mismatch significant enough to bring him to the phone the morning after his own clients had celebrated what they believed was a successful transfer. Mr. Harmon, I said, are you telling me my signature was forged on an official legal document in order to transfer a property I hold the mortgage on without my knowledge? A careful pause. Professional. Deliberate. I'm telling you, he said, that you should speak to your own attorney. Today, if possible. Then, what was done here may constitute forgery. I didn't move for a long time after I hung up. Outside my window, the city was conducting its morning without any awareness that my world had tilted. A delivery truck idled at the curb, 2 children walked past with backpacks. A woman in a yellow coat walked a small dog with great urgency, as if there was somewhere important to be. My family had forged my signature. Not made a procedural error, not cut a corner, not forgotten to inform me. They had signed my name on a legal document, an authorization form dated 4 months ago, which meant this had been planned since at least then. Probably longer. I thought about the anniversary dinner, my mother smiling across the table, my father making a toast about family, Diane helping clear the dishes and chatting about nothing in particular. All of it, a performance. I picked up my phone and called Priya, a friend from university who had become a property attorney. We had coffee twice a year and always meant to see each other more. I had never needed to call her professionally. She answered on the second ring. I explained in plain, organized sentences what had happened. When I finished, she was quiet for 3 seconds. Elena, she said, do you want to press charges? I stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the window. The delivery truck was gone. The woman in the yellow coat had rounded the corner. The street below was ordinary and unhurried, the way streets are when they have no idea what is happening inside the buildings that line them. I thought about 6 years. 6 years of monthly payments pulled automatically from my account on the 14th of every month, with the quiet reliability of something you don't think about, because it is simply what you do. 6 years of being called the dependable one, the sensible one. The one you didn't need to worry about because she would always handle things. 6 years of watching Diane be celebrated and accommodated. Not because she had done more, but because she had always been the daughter my parents found easier to love. I thought about the Tuesday evening phone call when my father's voice had gone small and frightened, and I had said yes without hesitation because they were my parents and they needed me. I thought about my mother's face in that lawyer's office. Not guilt. Not regret, but relief. I thought about a signature on a form dated 4 months ago that wasn't mine. I turned away from the window. Yes, I said. Priya moved quickly. That was one of the things I had always respected about her. She had no patience for inertia. Within 48 hours, she had filed a formal challenge with the county recorder's office, flagged the account with the bank, and engaged a forensic document examiner to produce a written analysis of the signature discrepancy. Within 72 hours, she had submitted a formal complaint to the relevant authorities. The police knocked on my parents' door on a Thursday afternoon. I know this because Diane called 11 minutes later, her voice at a pitch I had never heard from her before. Not angry, but cracked and disoriented, like someone who had been walking confidently along a path and had suddenly stepped off the edge. "What did you do?" she said. "I was at my desk at work. I put one finger in my other ear." "I told the truth," I said. "You called the police on your own parents." "I reported a forged signature on a legal document," I said. "The police determine what that means." A pause, then smaller. "I didn't know they were going to do that part." I said nothing. "Elena?" "Goodbye, Diane," I said quietly. I hung up and went back to work. The days that followed had a strange, suspended quality. Priya kept me informed in careful, organized updates, factually and without embellishment, which I appreciated, because the facts were dramatic enough on their own. The deed had been formally flagged. The bank placed a hold on the account pending legal determination. The transfer was not yet cancelled, but frozen, unable to be sold, refinanced, or leveraged in any way while the investigation remained open. My mother left a voicemail on the third evening. She was crying in a way that felt real this time. Not a performance of distress, but the sound of someone who had genuinely arrived at the edge of something, and only then realized how far down it went. "We could lose everything," she said. "Not just the house. Everything. Please, Elena, think about what you're doing." I sat with the phone in my hand after the message ended. I want to be honest about what I felt. The temptation is to say I felt nothing, that I had become hard and invulnerable. But that would not be true. I felt grief. Real, quiet grief. Not for what was happening now, but for the version of my family I had spent years trying to believe in, the one where they loved me as fully as I loved them. That version had never existed. I deleted the voicemail and went to bed. The legal hearing was held on a Friday morning in a building that smelled of old paper and institutional coffee. Priya sat beside me in a charcoal blazer, her files organized with a precision that made opposing parties nervous. My parents sat across the room with a new attorney, not Mr. Harmon, who had apparently recused himself. Diane was beside them, wearing a dark blouse and the expression of someone who had not slept properly in days. The hearing was a formal review of the filing challenge, not a trial, but the findings were substantive enough that the room had a certain weight to it. The hearing officer, a composed woman named Miss Ayres, read the forensic document examiner's findings into the official record. Her voice was measured and without drama. "Signature mismatch, confirmed on Exhibit C, page 7 of the authorization documents. Analysis concludes with high probability that the signature attributed to Elena Voss was not produced by Elena Voss." She set the page down. Gasps filled the room from the observers seated along the wall. Ms. Ayres looked up, adjusted her glasses, and directed her gaze across the table. Not at me. At my parents. Her expression was not anger, not sympathy. It was the look of someone doing a job who had arrived, without needing to say it aloud, at a clear conclusion. I sat very still and folded my hands on the table. What followed happened in the methodical, unglamorous way that legal consequences usually do. Not in a dramatic rush, but in careful, sequential steps, each one closing off another exit. Forgery charges were formally filed against my parents the following week. The evidence was clear, and the examiner's report left little room for dispute. The deed transfer was voided by the county recorder's office. Regardless of what had been signed and notarized and celebrated, Diane's name on that document now meant nothing. The property reverted to its prior legal status, mortgaged, contested, carrying my name as the responsible party. The bank, now fully informed, blocked any new ownership claim from being filed without their written consent going forward. And the mortgage debt, the balance outstanding, the years of remaining payments, was formally reassigned. Not to me, to my parents. It was the mechanism that undid everything they had arranged. They had tried to give Diane the asset while leaving me the liability. The reassignment inverted that completely. The asset was contested. The liability landed exactly where the fraud had originated. My sister called the evening the reassignment notice was served. She wasn't screaming this time. Her voice was flat and exhausted. "We can't afford this," she said. "You know Mom and Dad can't afford this." I did know that. It was the part I had been thinking about most carefully. I asked Priya to arrange one more meeting. Not a confrontation. A formal, structured conversation with a clear proposal on the table. The the kind that left no room for manipulation or the slow erosion of terms that happens when families try to resolve things informally over dinner. My parents arrived looking diminished in a way I had never seen before. My father's shirt was slightly wrinkled. My mother's eyes were swollen. Diane sat between them, hands folded, chin down. I sat across from them with Priya beside me and a single document in front of me. "I'll take over the mortgage again," I said. The relief that moved across their faces was immediate and involuntary, the kind that bypasses a person's defenses because it is too urgent to wait. My father exhaled shakily. My mother pressed her hand to her mouth. I waited 2 beats. In exchange for full legal ownership in my name alone. The relief stopped, the deed, the title, the property, everything. My name, a clean transfer, this time done correctly, with full lender notification, proper documentation, and my signature, the real one, on every page. I slid the document across the table. Priya had spent 3 days drafting it. It was precise and airtight. "Take as long as you need to read it," I said calmly. "Then the judge will ask if you accept." They said yes. They had no real choice, and all of us in that room understood it. But I want to be clear. I did not feel triumph the way people imagine at the end of a fight. I felt something quieter, something that settled in my chest like the last note of a song you've been listening to for a very long time. The transfer was completed properly this time. Lender consent, full documentation, every signature on every relevant line, all of them mine, all of them verified. The bank confirmed the change in writing within 10 business days. The house became mine. The debt was manageable, because it had been structured around my income for 6 years already. Nothing changed about the financial reality except whose name sat at the top of the page. My parents left the courthouse without speaking to me. My mother looked at me once across the lobby and turned away. My father walked with his eyes on the floor. Diane was the last to leave. She paused and looked at me for a long moment, not with hatred, not with contrition, but with the expression of a person who had lost and was still working out exactly what and why. I looked back at her and did not look away. Then she walked out the door. I hadn't won by hurting them. I had won by letting the truth be the loudest thing in the room. And truth, unlike family loyalty, never needs someone else to sign for it.